I believe that Donald Trump is not just a politician. I feel that Donald Trump is a phenomenon. And I think that in order to defeat him, and even more importantly, in order to transform this country, we need to create a phenomenon of equal significance. And that will not be any one human being. That will be an arising. That will be a lifting up among the American people. You know, there are people all over this world who laugh at us. There are people all over the world who resent us. There are people all over the world who roll their eyes about us because they feel like we're just clueless about what's really going on this planet. And sometimes that's how we're acting. When you look at the state of the planet environmentally, where has America been? When you look at the state of the planet in so many ways, where has America been? But those same people who sometimes complain about America would be the first ones to admit that even though sometimes Americans are slow to wake up, when we do wake up, we slam it like nobody's business.
Yeah, baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to play the same old game. I'm not here to say, you know, elect me and I'll go to Washington and then everything's going to be okay. I want to talk to you not as children, but as real adults.
Yes.
That's the problem I have with the political system. It talks to us like we're children. It's a very superficial conversation. It's a very narrow conversation. It is way too shallow a container, very much too narrow a container for the kinds of energies and the conversations we need to be having. I heard somebody say after the second DNC debate that I was out of my depth. I'm sorry. I think I'm the only campaign even having a real good conversation. And if we have a deep conversation, we see some things that do not make a person happy. But that's what adults do. Adults face the facts. We have some very, very serious problems on our hands. But if we will look at them honestly, then we will also be able to deal with the fact that there are unlimited possibilities for solving those problems. And on the other side of those problems, if we do deal with them with radical honesty, with brutal self-awareness, then we can have the best chapter that the United States has ever seen. But that will not happen because we put Band-Aids on our problems. It will not happen because we're not taking a deep look in the mirror. It will not happen just because we're shoving things under the rug. You know, some of the most important things we have to look at, I'm the only candidate even talking about. Have you noticed that? Tulsi Gabbard and I are the only ones even talking about international relationships. We're the only ones even talking about what you and I were raised to call the military-industrial complex. Why aren't we in this seat? Why are we only talking about health care, but not talking about why Americans are so sick? Why aren't we talking about our food policies? Why aren't we talking about our chemical policies? Why aren't we talking about our agricultural policies? Why aren't we talking about our oil and gas policies? Oil and gas policies, it's not just about what it's doing to the environment, it's what it's doing to your body and what it's doing to my body. Why aren't we talking about the fact that in northern New Hampshire, 25% of all the children go to sleep hungry at night? Why aren't we talking about 43 million Americans who are hungry? Why aren't we talking about millions of American children who live with chronic trauma? Millions of American children who go to schools every day, in schools where they don't even have the adequate school supplies with which to teach a child to read. And if a child can't learn to read by the age of 8, then the chances for high school graduation are drastically decreased, and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. Why aren't we talking about the fact that our entire national security agenda is based almost solely on ways to prepare for war, but practically nil on actually waging peace? When I was growing up, politicians used to talk about peace and prosperity. And I asked myself a few years ago, why aren't they talking about peace and prosperity anymore? My first thought was, oh, well, that's a cliche. Then I realized that's not why they're not talking about it. They're not talking about it because that's not the goal anymore. You see, if we were really talking about prosperity in this country, we wouldn't be talking about a bunch of corporate aristocrats who are going to drop crumbs in the form of job creation. Ladies and gentlemen, you and I have to get this straight. You and I have to get that there's a serious power inversion that has taken place here. You and I have to get that we have acquiesced to a system in which we are merely poker chips to politicians. We are merely spectators. So let me tell you what I suggest we say to the corporate aristocrats who say that they're going to drop, we'll continue to give them things like a $2 trillion tax cut in 2017. where 83 cents of every dollar goes to the very richest corporations and individuals. This is what I believe we, the American people, should be saying to the corporate aristocrats who say that they will drop crumbs from their table in the form of job creation. This is what you and I should be saying. Give me free health care, give me a good education, and give me a fair shot. I'll create my own damn career. Once again, we let this happen. This has been happening over the last 40 years. This craziness was not created by Donald Trump. This craziness created Donald Trump. This has been going on for 40 years, that our democracy has been eroded, one policy after another, as we have slid away from a functioning democracy. Let's take that in, okay? Can we take that in? We are not functioning as a democracy, ladies and gentlemen. We're functioning as an oligarchy. We're functioning, you can call it a corporatocracy. But what it really means is that we have regressed. Just like a person can regress, we've regressed. We've regressed to what is essentially the same paradigm that we repudiated in 1776. In 1776, we repudiated the idea that only a few people get to win, a few rich people get to win. We said no to that in 1776. There was the idea that a few people could have health care, a few people, in those days it wasn't a few people could have health care, we said a few people could have land, and a few people could have an education, a few people could have wealth-creating opportunities. With the founding of this country, we rejected that. But we have become a country, once again, where for all intents and purposes, public policy over and over and over again, because of the undue influence of money on our politics, public policy does more to advocate for the right of a few people who already have money to make even more, and harder for everybody else to even make it at all. That is not a reason for cynicism. It is not a reason for despair. It is a reason, however, for peaceful revolution. And John F. Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. You see, ladies and gentlemen, I use the word revolution because I do not believe incremental change is going to fix this. I do not believe that the traditional political status quo, even the better version of the traditional political status quo, is going to repair itself, because it never does. The U.S. government didn't wake up and decide to end slavery. You know why slavery ended it? You know what? Everybody in New Hampshire should be really proud, because the early abolitionist movement came in large part from New Hampshire. Abolitionist movement arose because of early evangelicals and Quakers. The people rose up and the people stepped in. And the same is true of women's suffrage. The U.S. government didn't wake up one day and say, oh, let's give women the right to vote, shall we? That's not what happened. With the women's suffragette movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. And the same is true with segregation in the American South and institutionalized white supremacy. The U.S. government didn't wake up one day and say, let us end segregation. Come on, everybody, we need to learn and remember some American history. With the civil rights movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. And you and I are being asked to assume that the political status quo is going to repair itself. The political status quo even now isn't even talking about those children, not talking about poverty, not talking about hunger, not talking about the military-industrial complex. It's not really talking about the fact that health insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies and gun manufacturers and chemical companies and oil and gas companies and defense contractors are the new American aristocracy. And even the ones who are talking about it, why don't you check on the internet sometime and see how many hundreds of thousands they too have received from them. Now, I'm not demonizing any individuals here, because we're talking about a lot of really nice people, but we're talking about a system that is as corrupt as it gets. And that is what I have learned from this campaign. That's what I've learned from this experience. The system is even more corrupt than I feared, and people are even more wonderful than I hoped. The problem, as I see it, is not in the American people. We're fine, okay? The people are fine. I'm not saying we're better than other people, but we're certainly as good as other people. I think the average American does want to be a good person. I think the average American does care about mercy and integrity and compassion and justice. I do think the American people are good. The problem is not in the American people. The problem is the gap that exists between who we are as people and how our government behaves. And there is a lock. An amoral economic system has that government by the throat. It has corrupted it with the undue influence of that corporate money. And it has hijacked our value system, ladies and gentlemen, no differently than with civil rights, no differently than with women's suffrage, and no differently than with slavery. It's time for the people to step in. And let's be really clear about what the game is here. Of course they say about anyone who is not one of them, unqualified. Of course they do. Of course they say about anyone who's not one of them, an outsider. I have news for you. It's America. We're all supposed to be insiders. What is this? What is this? It's just the way the game is being played, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I know the most important thing of all. The most important thing of all is that we have a new president in 2020. I'm as clear about that as anybody is. But I'll tell you something, this president is not just a politician. This president is a phenomenon. And anybody who thinks an insider politics game is going to have an easy time defeating him does not recognize the deeper level on which this man has hooked into the psyche of the American people. The only way I believe we can truly defeat the president in 2020 is to create a phenomenon of equal weight and power. Now, that is not an individual, but it is a wakening up of each and every one of us. We need some inspiration, we need some motivation, we need some getting down in a way that will not occur unless we're willing to do the things that alone create that kind of energy. We got to tell some real truth. I'm not saying that my opponents are lying, because they're not, but I will tell you this. In a court of law, you raise your hand. You don't just swear to tell the truth. You swear to tell the whole truth, and you swear to tell nothing but the truth. I'm not just telling you the truth. A lot of people are telling you the truth. I'm telling you the whole truth, and I'm telling you nothing but the truth, and nothing less than that. So what is the real truth? The real truth is that corporate America has a lock. Corporate America has a lock in ways that it should not, too much even on both major political parties. I'm telling you the deep truth, and that all that the conventional political establishment has done is to normalize the despair of millions of American children who live in chronic trauma. The real truth is that you and I need to rebond and rethink about what the Declaration of Independence says, because the Declaration of Independence is our mission statement. So let me go over it a little bit with you, because I think we somehow have forgotten. These principles are written on marble walls, and they're written on parchment, but they're not alive in our hearts anymore. And let me tell you what happens when your principles aren't alive in your heart. When your principles aren't alive in your heart, they die. And so what happens is, when you don't know what your principles are, you don't know what you stand on, you don't know what values you care about, you don't know when to say, I stand on that and I'm not going to not stand on it, and you back up if you'd have me not stand on it, you become easy to play. And that is what has happened to our generation. We have become easy to play. So let's revisit those first principles, because when we do, everything changes. Number one, and like I said at the beginning, this isn't just your rights, this is our responsibility to remember these things, to keep them alive, and to bequeath them to our children in even better shape than we found them. Number one, all men are created equal. Number two, all men have been given by God inalienable rights of life and of liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Ask yourself if those children who go to school every day, hungry at school, are they living their right to pursue happiness? So let me tell you the next principle, because we learned them but we forget. The next one is that governments are instituted to secure those rights. And you know what it says after that? If the government's not doing its job, it's the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting we abolish it, but I am suggesting that we alter it. And do not kid yourself to think that just some incremental changes here and there will be altering it at all. It is time for us to awaken and not only make changes in the way we are structured economically, but to make changes in how we even think about these things. We need to do more than just not go over the cliff. We need to get out of the cliff entirely. We need to repeal the 2017 tax cut that gave 83 cents of every dollar to the richest individuals and corporations. We need to put back in the middle class tax cuts. We need to get rid of those corporate subsidies, $26 billion to the oil and gas companies alone last year. We need to recognize how betrayed we have been by our own government. You know, when those big corporate entities pour in millions and hundreds of millions of dollars in lobbying, they want something for that. You get that, right? So $284 million last year spent on lobbying by Big Pharma. Even oil and gas only spent 125, I think, million in lobbying. So what did they get from that a few years ago? They got that the United States government gave away its power to negotiate with big pharmaceutical companies for lower drug prices. This is why Americans live in fear every day. What am I going to do for insulin after I'm off my parents' health insurance? Not only that, we're going to ask, what does the military need for our safety? What does the military need for our national security? Because I think we'd all agree every dollar that they say they need for our national security, they should get. But we should look at our military the way you look at a surgeon. If the United States if we need surgery, we should have the best surgeon. But you avoid surgery if possible. Right now, our national security agenda, there's so much financial investment in defense contractors and endless preparation for war, and no particular financial reward for them in actually waging peace. So for both of those things, ladies and gentlemen, you take all those things I just said, plus you put 3% tax on the assets of billionaires, which many billionaires agree with we should do. You put a 2% tax on the assets of 50 million and more, which many people with 50 million and more agree with. You know what's going to happen after you do everything I just said? We're going to have some cash on hand. And once we have some cash on hand, I'm telling you what we're going to do with it. We will return to a government of the people and by the people and for the people. And we will fundamentally rearrange some things because we will transform from the inside out. We will look at this country in the mirror. That's why I want to be president. I want to be president to help this country navigate through some very turbulent times. They are even more turbulent than we think. We think all the turbulence is just because of Donald Trump, and I certainly agree it's turbulent. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. You think it's scary now? I'll tell you a chilling prospect. Give that man another 4 years. So nothing could be more important than we win this election. But if all we do is have a Democrat win this election, they will be back. They will be back in 22, and they will be back in 24. We have a bigger job than just winning this election. We must end an aberrational chapter in American history and usher in a new one. Do not expect the political status quo that drove us into this ditch to drive us out of this ditch, and it is preposterous that they say only someone whose career has been entrenched for decades in that system is possibly qualified to drive us out of it. No, that's not what's going to happen. What we need to do here is to deeply transform. And we transform as a nation the way we transform as an individual. You look in the mirror and you ask yourself, where am I and where am I not who I say I am? Where do I and do I not stand on the principles I say I stand on? Where do I have my own shadows? Where do I have my own stuff I have to look at? Where do I have to atone? Where do I have to make amends? And where do I need to commit to change? Number one, we need a massive realignment of investment in the direction of America's children. That's why I want a United States Department of Children and Youth. This will not happen under the traditional political status quo. Why would it? They've simply normalized the despair of these children. Why? Because these children aren't old enough to vote, so they're not a political constituency. They're not old enough to work, so they don't have any financial leverage. How can they compete with all that corporate clout? I want to ask you, where do you think these kids are going to be in 20 years? What do you think is going to happen to these kids? We have millions of American children. Psychologists say that many of them have a form of PTSD that is no less severe than the PTSD of a veteran from Afghanistan or Iraq. Ladies and gentlemen, if somebody grows up, a child grows up in a well-to-do neighborhood in the United States, nice middle-class neighborhood, that child has a very good chance of a very high-quality public school education. But we are practically the only country in the world that bases our education primarily on property taxes. So if a child does not grow up in a neighborhood that is financially secure, the chances of a public school education are drastically decreased. Ladies and gentlemen, please remember with me what the Declaration of Independence says. Where is the chance of these children to pursue happiness? I want a United States Department of Children and Youth. This is so much bigger than just more education funding. Give me a break. We have children in this country who are traumatized by preschool. We have elementary school children in the United States on suicide watch. We need community wraparound services. We need anti-trauma. We need violence prevention. We need restorative justice. We need conflict resolution. We need family services. We need child health and nutrition. We need to deal with the fact we have a relatively high infant mortality rate. We have a relatively high maternal mortality rate. And I want to say something with all love. Where the hell are the women in America that this is allowed to stand? And just as you can't just take medicine, you also have to cultivate health. We can't just endlessly prepare for war. We have to wage peace. Even Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense under George Bush, said we must wage peace. Ladies and gentlemen, with the $750 billion spent on the military and $40 billion spent on the State Department, and within the State Department, the humanitarian agencies spent $17 billion out of that, and less than $1 billion on the peace-building agencies. When I'm President of the United States, if you decide to make me President of the United States, we will have a United States Department of Peace. And the peace builders will be given equal power. In my National Security Council, it will not be all the military brass and everything like that sitting around at a table while the peace builders are over on the other side of the room or standing around the corner like they're peripheral. You know, what do the peace building agencies do? I'll tell you what they do, because every American should understand what goes on here. Peace building is just as sophisticated and takes just as much of a level of expertise as does military, which of course is extremely important. This is not in any way a critique of our military. This is a critique of our politicians and their decision making. There are 4 factors which, when present, statistically indicate that there will be a greater incidence of peace and a diminished incidence of conflict. Number 1, expanded economic opportunities for women. Number 2, reduction of violence against women. Number 3, expansion of educational opportunities for children. And number 4, the reduction of unnecessary human suffering wherever possible. We should see large groups of desperate people as a national security risk. Desperate people do desperate things. Desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. We have given up all moral leadership in this world. We do things as a government, as a country on this planet today that would make our grandparents roll over in their graves. For the sake of $350 billion in an arms sale to Saudi Arabia, we give aerial support to a genocidal war by which they're prosecuting on Yemen. Tens of thousands of people have starved. Many of them are children. When Mike Pompeo, our Secretary of State, was asked how the United States could do this, his response was, sometimes you have strategic partnerships with people who do not share your values. Let me translate that for you. That means we have no values. That means we have sacrificed our values. That means we've thrown moral leadership out the window. And I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that's on our watch. That's on our watch. And so the problem at the deepest level is not that the United States is giving aerial support to a genocidal war. The deeper problem is we're hardly even discussing it. That's the deeper problem. Because at a certain point, it's not about what happens to you. It's about who you choose to be in the space of what's happened to you. So I'm laying it for real. I'm not somebody who wants to win by not upsetting you, not wanting to get too real with you because it would sound negative. I don't look at leadership that way. I think leaders think what needs to be said, not what should be said if I want to get your vote. I don't think we're not children, we're adults. And what I've seen over and over again in my life is sometimes when people get the bad news is when we become most intelligent and most noble. I've worked for 35 years up close and personal with people whose lives are in crisis. We have what it takes. I see it in the eyes of people in this room. I see it everywhere I've been. We're more than capable of hearing the bad news and having a serious adult conversation about what we need to do. But that means that the leader is someone who needs to tell you. You don't expect the doctor to not tell you if the test results came out bad. So what I'm telling you is we got some serious stuff we have to look at here. These are serious problems, but however, the opportunities for solution are infinite, but not if we do not look at these problems. And the last serious issue I want to tell you about, because if you elect me president, we're going to address it, is that this country, no different than an individual, cannot have the future we want unless and until we are willing to clean up the past. Remember, that's the president I want to be. I want to end one chapter, start a new one. And we will not be able to start a new chapter until once and for all. It is time. Let it be this generation. When it comes to Black Americans, when it comes to American descendants of slaves, and when it comes to Native Americans, we have some karmic debt. Let's clean it up. Just admit it. Just recognize it. See it for what it is. Don't drag this on generation to generation, handing it to the next generation. It's real. In a way, it's pretty simple. You had 250 years of slavery. That was followed by another 100 years of institutionalized violence against Black people. That's 350 years, ladies and gentlemen. And I think we'd all agree that if you've been kicking somebody to the ground, and I think we'd all agree that 350 years is kicking them to the ground, you have a moral responsibility, not just to stop kicking, but to say, here, let me help you get back up. So what we have is a situation where at the end of the Civil War, understandably, huge economic gap, Tecumseh Sherman promised, General Sherman promised 40 acres and a mule to every former slave family of 4. Now what happened then is that was rescinded, the promise was rescinded, and Southern legislatures all over the South passed what were called Black Code laws in order to ensure subpar economic and social and political opportunities. So ladies and gentlemen, Germany has paid $89 billion to Jewish organizations since World War II. That doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen, but it has gone a long way towards establishing genuine reconciliation between Germany and the Jews of Europe. What I am submitting is a proposal to you that we pay over a period of 20 years, $200 to $500 billion that would be given through a council, a reparations council of Black leaders from all academia, culture, and politics, many of whom have done scholarly work on the topic of reparations. The money, the stipulation of the U.S. government would be that the money is to be used for purposes of economic and educational renewal. Now, I'd like to point out this money is a stimulus. This money is a stimulus. This money is going into the economy. This money is infinitely more of a stimulus than that $2 trillion tax cut, okay? And CBS recently, there was a study done just that came out last week that if black families made as much money, earned as much money as white families, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. Just like those children. If we really want prosperity, if you really want an amazing economy 10 years from now, I'll tell you what you do. Take better care of your 10-year-olds today. I'll tell you what you do. You want to see the entrepreneurial genius of the American people? I'll tell you where it is. You want to see the power to fuel a 21st century more amazing than anything this country has ever seen? I'll tell you where it is. It's in the brain of every kindergartner in this country. There is nothing in the ground, there's nothing in the air, there's nothing in the sky, there's nothing in the wind that can compete with the brain power. And every time you see a kindergarten in the United States where we are not allowing for and doing everything we can to foster the full self-actualization of our children, we're putting millions and billions of trillions of dollars on the table like we just don't want it. So I hope, ladies and gentlemen, whether it comes to race, whether it comes to peace, whether it comes to children, whether it comes to our economy, what I'm saying to you is, no, we got to make some big changes. Now, I don't want to be an agent of chaos. I want to be an agent of change. I don't want to be an agent of chaos. What I'm saying to you, however, is if we do not make these changes, oh, we're going to have some chaos. You cannot just endlessly prepare for war and hope that one day you back up into peace. You cannot allow millions and millions of children to grow up in unbelievably traumatized circumstances and not expect to pay for that 20 years down the road. You cannot continue with an economic circumstance in which 40% of all Americans live in chronic economic anxiety and not expect some storming of the Bastilles. You see, no individual should think only of themselves, and no generation should think only of itself either, and that means you and me. We have to think about what this country is going to be like 10 years from now. We need to think about what this country is going to be 50 years from now. I don't think Americans are tired and weary because we have so much to do. I think we're tired and weary because we're not doing enough of what really matters. Americans are hardwired for great things. We're like an airplane, amazing in the sky, but kind of clunky on the runway. We're like a great sports car, amazing on the highway, but you wouldn't know it just seeing us on the road. So, we're going to have a little incremental change here and an incremental change there and a change in policy here and a change. Let me tell you something. All this bit about everybody's plans, and I have plans. My plan for the Department of Peace, my plan for the Department of Children and Youth, my plan of reparations. I hope you'll look at my website. She doesn't have any plans. Oh, I have plans. But let me tell you, what we mainly need is a plan to defeat Donald Trump. And you're not going to defeat Donald Trump if all you're presenting to the American people is a plan here and a plan there. This is so much bigger what's going on here. We have collectivized hatred in the United States. Let's all wake up. There is nothing that has ever been more dangerous on this planet, nor is dangerous now, than when a bunch of hate-filled people get together. This is serious stuff. When you're talking about racists and bigots and anti-Semites and homophobes and Islamophobes and xenophobes, and they've all come together, and it's resonant in the field because of social media, and you have a president who is not above exploiting those things for political purposes, you have a problem on your hands. You have a serious problem on your hands. Now, it's not that more people hate than love in America, because a lot more people love than hate. The problem is those who hate are serious today. And that conviction that they display is a force multiplier. The problem isn't that they're more haters than lovers. The problem is that those of us who love need to love with as much conviction as is now displayed by those who hate. Yeah. So don't expect me. So don't expect me to be a president who's going to say, oh, children who are just living in chronic anxiety. You know, I read Michelle Obama's book, and it was a great book, you know, when she talks about her White House years. She talked about how much she did to try to help these what's called at-risk children, although we should think of them as underserved children. But I thought about it as I read the book. You know, if a first lady takes it on, that means it's something she did voluntarily because she wanted to. So the first lady was working on these at-risk children. Why the hell weren't they doing that in the West Wing? So we're not gonna pussyfoot around things that have to happen. We're not gonna pussyfoot around the fact that the military-industrial complex has us by such a chokehold. We're not gonna pussyfoot around the fact that B-21, the U.S. Air Force, has ordered 100 B-21 bombers. And everybody in this room should know what a B-21 Raider is. A B-21 Raider is a $550 million airplane. It's actually up to 560 now. That not only drops conventional weapons, but also drops nuclear weapons. And I want to say to you, not to some hotshot in Washington, I want to say to you, because the power is in the hands of the people, but it stops being in the hands of the people when it stops being in the head of the people, stop being in the heart of the people. I'm asking you, why do we need 100 airplanes that drop nuclear bombs?
We don't need one.
You drop 5 of those, it's over for human civilization as we know it. You drop 10 of those, it's over for the human race on this planet for a few 100,000 years. You know what, ladies and gentlemen? It is time for us to recognize those $560 million planes are ordered at 100 of them. Is not because that's a legitimate security need of the United States. That has to do with profits for defense contractors, and that is all. And you and I have to ask ourselves, what does it say about us when think about what one of those $550 million planes would do for those children in northern New Hampshire? That we can't, You know, at a certain point, life's not about what they're doing to you. It's about who you choose to be in the space of what they're doing. So I'm not talking to them, I'm talking to you. That's the point here. I'm not talking to them, I'm talking to you. And I'm not asking you to lend me your power. I don't want to disempower you, I want to empower you. I'm asking that you consider very, very deeply an entirely new paradigm in the United States today in terms of the relationship between the people and our government. And I would like you to consider that the paradigm change I'm asking you for is what we said in 1776. That the whole point of 1776 was that the government would be serving the people would not be serving the government. You're not here to make life easier for defense contractors or oil and gas or any of those multinational corporate entities. We need to change from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We need to change from a war economy to a peace economy. We have 12 years to reverse climate change, or the planet itself is imperiled. The life of the human race is imperiled. We need to wake up and we need to show up. I'm not saying I can do it, I'm saying we can do it. I'm saying we can do it. And I'm saying anything less than that is a failure to do what other generations before us have done. We need to identify our problems, but we need to identify with the problem solvers. The abolitionists didn't just go along, and the women's suffragettes didn't just go along, and the civil rights movement didn't just go along, and you and I shouldn't just go along. We need to remember the government works for us. We don't work for them, as I said to you already. And so I'm asking you to think about what it means to be a citizen. There's a rambunctiousness to being an American. We need to reclaim the rambunctiousness of America. Like when I was a kid, there was the thing about Stepford wives. We become Stepford citizens. Stepford citizens. What's going on here, ladies and gentlemen? Turns out the American Revolution is an ongoing process. You know, if you don't tend to your body, don't go being surprised if you lose your health. You don't tend to your marriage, don't go being surprised you lose your marriage. You don't tend to your business, don't go being surprised that you lose your money or your business. We didn't tend to our democracy. We have been almost brainwashed into this like pretty please mentality. Can we have a little bit of this? Maybe. Can our children eat? Maybe can our food not be filled with carcinogens? Maybe can our water not be filled with contaminants here in New Hampshire with the PFAS? Maybe could we have a fair shot? Hell no with the maybe. It is time for us to say to an entire political class of people, we have advised you, we have asked you, we wish you well, get up, we're taking the chair, we're coming in. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you.